All right, geometry review. Number 1. It says Ln has endpoints at -7 and 5. What are the coordinates of its midpoint? Okay, so here what we're looking for is the midpoint of a segment on a number line in one dimension. So if I had a line, we'll just make a rough sketch. I don't need the picture, but we'll draw one anyways. And there's points at -7 and 5. Okay, that is what our segment LN runs between. We want to figure out where its midpoint M is at. Okay, formula for one-dimensional midpoint is pretty simple. We'd say M, our midpoint, is just at the average of L and N, their coordinates. So in other words, L plus N over 2. So that's going to be equal to a -7 plus 5 over 2. All right, -7 plus 5 is equal to -2 over 2, which reduces down to just a -1. All right, we say I have -1 for the midpoint on that segment. In question 2, we're looking at finding a midpoint in 2 dimensions on our coordinate plane. Pretty straightforward. Question 2 just says, what's the midpoint of segment CD? Now that midpoint formula is this: M's equal to parentheses x1 plus x2 over 2, comma y1 plus y2 over 2. So essentially I'm just going to average my x coordinates and average my y coordinates. Now with this one, let's make sure we know what our coordinates are actually. D looks like it's at a 2 comma -2 over 2 in the x and down 2 in the y. And then C is at a -2 comma 4. Okay, if the problem doesn't give those to me, I'm going to find those right off the bat so I have the numbers to work with. And then let's plug these in. x1 plus x2 just means add the two x coordinates together. And it doesn't matter what order I do that in. I can pick an order. There's no rule for which of these 2 points is the first point, which one's the second. So we'll just plug them in the order. I'll go -2 plus 2 over 2, comma, and then we'll stay in the same order for the y. Since I went C plus D for the x, we'll go C plus D for the y. So y plus y will be 4 plus -2, in other words 4 minus 2 over 2. And then when I reduce these fractions down, I'll have the x coordinate on the left, y coordinate on the right. It's going to turn into an ordered pair, an xy pair. Okay, let's see here. -2 plus 2 is just a 0. So we have 0 over 2, comma, and 4 minus 2 is just a 2. So we're left with then 0 divided by 2 is just a 0. 2 divided by 2 is just a 1. And as long as I have a picture here, I might as well plot that. Over 0, up 1 is going to be right here. It hit the line, looks like it's right about in the middle, so we most likely found our midpoint there. In problem 3, we're using the midpoint formula once again, but this time we're going to use it to work backwards to find an endpoint. So let's read through this. It says the midpoint of CD is M at -2, 1. One endpoint is C at -5, 7. What are the coordinates of the other endpoint? Okay, so we have segment CD. We know what C is. We know what the midpoint is. We want to use that to figure out what D is. Once again, we're going to use the midpoint formula for this one. M's equal to average of the x's, x1 plus x2 over 2. Average of the y's, y1 plus y2 over 2. And what we'll do is we'll fill in what we know. We know one of the x and y coordinates. We know where C is at. So we'll say -5 for the first x. And then I'll just say plus x instead of x2 over 2. And then we'll take C's y coordinate, 7, plus the other y over 2. Okay, so I know one of the x and y coordinates. I want to figure out what the other x and y are for this one. And the trick is I also know what the midpoint is. We already have our m, which is at a -2, 1. And essentially what I'm looking to do here is figure out what x I'd plug into the right side of my expression that will give me this -2 out, and what y I'd plug in to get the 1 out for the x and y parts of this formula. Okay, you can always guess and check at this, use some number sense, but the most straightforward way would be to set up an equation using the x coordinate for the midpoint and the part of the formula that gives us that x coordinate. Okay, we can put those together and set them equal to each other. I can say -2 is equal to -5 plus x over 2. I then have a pretty simple equation to solve for the x. Okay, to solve, I need to cancel this fraction. Okay, we can think of this over 2 as division by 2. To undo division, I use multiplication, so I'm going to multiply both sides of this equation by 2. That's going to cancel the division on the right, leaving me with just a -5 plus x on the right, which is equal to a -4 on the left. All right, to get the x by itself, we'll add 5 to both sides. And that's leaving us with x equals 1. Okay, so there's half our answer. There's the x coordinate. And then what I'll do is I'll do the exact same thing with the y coordinate. We'll take the y coordinate of the midpoint and the y part of the midpoint formula. We'll set those equal to each other and say that 1 is equal to 7 plus y over 2. And then solve it in the exact same way. I'm going to multiply both sides by 2 to get rid of my fraction. So we end up with 2 equals 7 plus y. And we'll subtract 7 on both sides. And that'll give us y is equal to a -5. So we have the x, we have the y. We now know the endpoint D. We can say D is at coordinates 1, -5. And if I want to check this one, I suppose I could plug the endpoints C and D into my original midpoint formula, and I would get the midpoint they were given to me out when it's all said and done. Last question we're going to look at is using the distance formula. Problem 4 says, what is the length of segment CD? Okay, length, in other words, find the distance from C to D, round to the nearest tenth. And we have our distance formula. It is this guy. D is equal to square root of, in parentheses, x, we'll say 2 minus x1 squared. Now I almost said x1 minus x2, there won't be a difference. Okay, just one x coordinate minus the other. And then plus in the same order, y2 minus y1 squared. Okay, so before we fill that in, let's figure out what our actual coordinates are. It looks like D is at x equals 6, y equals 1. And C is at x equals -3, y equals 4. So filling that formula in, I'm going to go x minus x. And it really doesn't matter, once again, which point I pick as my first one, C or D. I'm just going to go left to right. So let's say for x minus x we have -3 minus 6. And we'll square that. Okay, plus, in the same order then, and this is important, once you pick an order, you have to stick with an order. So plus y minus y squared. So since I went C minus D for the x, I've got to go C minus D for the y. So we'll go 4 minus 1. All right, so we have our formula filled in. And technically I could just plug this straight into the calculator at this point. Wouldn't recommend that though. Let's reduce it. Let's make what we're plugging in a little bit simpler. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to evaluate what's inside the parentheses. If we think of order of operation, it's parentheses first, so we'll do that. So we'll keep our square root, and then inside the parentheses, -3 minus 6 is going to give me a -9. And that is squared. I'm going to keep the parentheses there because we have a negative. All right, plus inside the second set of parentheses, we have 4 minus 1, which is a 3. So we'll say 3 squared. Okay, then we want to square things out. -9 squared is going to give me a positive 81. I know 9 times 9 is 81, so -9 times -9 will be 81 as well. Okay, a negative times a negative is a positive. And if you want to get this correct answer on your calculator, you do need to have the parentheses around that -9. Otherwise, the calculator will square the 9 and just put the negative there. Okay, so we want the numbers coming out here to be positive. Okay, plus 3 squared. 3 times 3 is 9. All right, we can add those together. So we have square root of 81 plus 9 is 90. And then this will be where I go to my calculator for. If I pull it up, it's going to look a little different on everybody's calculator, but what I'm looking for is this square root symbol. Typically that's above the x squared symbol. Okay, and to get what's above what we're looking for, we'll hit the second button. That's going to allow me to access everything above, so we'll say second x squared, so I have my square root. We'll plug in the 90, and that gives me the 9.5 here for an answer.